evening. Good evening and welcome to Forbes Library. We're situated on the land of the Nunatak, and welcome to the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Library Museum. If you have never been in this room, we are the only presidential museum in a public library, so welcome. I'm Julie, I'm the archivist of Forbes Library. We're thrilled that we are at capacity for this program tonight. We have not hit fire code since before COVID in an in-person program. So please keep these two doorways and the doorway in the back open and clear for egress. The bathrooms, should you need them, are through the gallery, through the arch, and down the hallway. There's also bathrooms on our mezzanine and first floor levels as well. So we have with us here tonight a new documentary video on the Mill River by Stan Sherer. And Stan and Forbes Library have had a wonderful relationship for over 50 years, researching, working, and promoting local history. There will be a panel discussion and question and answer after the film. And Stan has brought with him Gabby Immerman and John Sinton, who helped research on the film for the Q&A as well. So we'll now turn over to Stan.
Thank you. I'm rather overwhelmed to see so many people here and many people that I know. Thank you all for coming. I have many thank yous to offer. First, to the staff of the Forbes Library, Dylan Gaffney, who supplied me with historical images from the library's collection. Faith Kaufman, the art and music librarian, and Julie Bartlett Nelson. Thank you all for making this event possible. John Sinton, Gabby Immerman, experts on the river, on the Mill River, and provided an endless source of information for my research. Thank you so much. Laurie Sanders from Historic Northampton. You will see some of her footage of wildlife along the river, and thank you, Laurie, for making that available. Marjorie Seneschal, my wife, whose piano playing you will hear, beautiful piano playing. Henry Lyman, who is a neighbor and offered to share his poems for the film. Amber Cross, our granddaughter, who critiqued the film and had some very insightful things to say. Thank you very much all. I'm going to show you the Bible of the Mill River, written by John Sinton. This book has everything you could possibly want to know about the river, the history, and the region. It's available through Levelers Press, and it's an incredible volume. I don't want to say much more, so I think we shall begin. And Dylan Gaffney will also be available to answer questions along with our panelists and is a local history expert. So again, thank you all for being here.
I don't remember that so little.
No, I've never seen practice at all. What's he fishing for? Maybe it's a fish.
Yeah, after that we had a good time. Basically, stayed most of the week with the solo.
Oh, you know, in the summer,
had-
it's a good place to be.
I wanted to do it before we didn't have to take a
Oh, you know, we can go sit right there. Okay, cool. Let's do it. Yeah.
Oh wait, you want to go back up in there?
No, look, right there.
Yes, but there's one.
There's a stick.
Okay, I'll let you do that. But I'm wearing white shoes.
All right, I'm gonna take my shoes off because that was the plan anyways, but.
Okay, cool. And my parents hated the balloon. How many times did they
Right at the beginning of the conflict, so I want to say in the late 80s, it was really an escalation. Because, yes, the parliament issued this decree, but again, since 1918 and onwards, periodically throughout the Soviet Union, that parliament and the Armenian Republic and the Soviet Union had issued petitions, basically, to Moscow.
That's the level that I'm working with. Oh, I'm excited about it. Yeah. For growth. Yes. Yeah.
right, thanks for coming out, everybody. We're going to take a few minutes just to set up the panel. I encourage you to stay if you're comfortable. It's amazing to see this many faces in the library. We really appreciate it, and to see this incredible film. So we need to bring the chairs over. Is your mic back on?
It's on. Yep. Okay.
Are you going to sit at the table with us?
Yeah. So,
Beautiful, man.
thank you. Well, I couldn't have done it without you, you know.
Feel good.
Stanley, I'm going to write you about this.
Okay.
I'm going to write you a long
Okay,
letter.
thank you for being here.
It is beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
It is beautiful, Stanley.
Thank you.
I'll write you all about it.
Okay,
George the critic. He loved it.
thank you for coming. Okay.
All right, folks, we're going to get started with the panel discussion here, so if we could quiet down, folks. Thank you so much. I would like to say we have two people here who know all about the river, and they will answer questions concerning the river. If you have questions about the making of the film, I'd be happy to address those. Mr. Bill.
I'm not quite sure how to ask it, but clearly a number of those pictures were done with a drone.
Yes.
And I just was wondering how you used it, and can you make the camera do things from a distance? And
Right.
how long did it take you to do that? You know, anything you want to say about the drone?
I started the film, I have a microphone. I have, well, I started, oh yes, the question is, how did the drone come into play with all this? So that's a very good question, and you know, I started filming along the shores with a cinema camera, and as I worked, I realized, oh my goodness, you have to be above the river to really understand how it flows, how it moves, what goes on. So I bought a drone.
And it did take a while to figure out how to fly it. And I almost lost it on my first flight. But I did figure it out, and it proved invaluable. I don't think the film would have nearly as much impact without it.
Does it get caught in the trees?
I had one crash where that view along Clark Avenue, when I brought the drone back, I clipped a tree branch and it went crashing into a fence. And it broke my heart.
Are there any artifacts of the Algonquins who lived along the river in this area?
Are there any
Artifacts or?
I was just repeating the question. Yeah. Are there any Native American artifacts along the river? Yes, there are, but most of them have been taken and put in somebody's pocket somewhere. And it's very difficult to find, and this whole region here has been combed over for now, what is it, almost 400 years? It's been going for a long time. And so it's hard. They're everywhere. I mean, I think some of you remember recently down by the co-op, River Valley Co-op, there are sites like that 6, 7, 8,000 years old that will remain undiscovered, but they're everywhere.
Yes, sir.
I had a question. I learned in the film something I didn't know before, that there's an east and west branch that come together. I wondered, do those two branches originate from different sources, or does the river break into two branches and then come back?
Well, they do originate from different sources, but I'm going to ask one of you to talk about that.
One originates up in Goshen. That's right at the line between the Westfield River on one side and the Mill River on the east side, and the other is up in Ashfield.
I just want to add something. This is, you all can hear well with this? Okay. Another way to think about it is that the Mill River drains the Mill River watershed. And if you think about the watershed almost perfectly aligns with the town of Williamsburg. And then there are small edges in Chesterfield and Goshen and Ashfield and a little West Hampton. And so those two, it's a sort of a letter Y. But another way to think about it is that that's kind of the main drainage corridor of the bowl that the river drains out, and then through Williamsburg, Northampton, and into the Connecticut.
Why don't you call on some?
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah. How about right here? Yes.
Two questions. The artifacts, what would they be if you were looking, so you would know you're looking at a Native American artifact? Otherwise, yeah.
They would, what would the artifacts look like? They would chiefly be points, what are called points, little arrow-like things. They used to be called arrowheads. And most of them will be points. Sometimes there are, more often than not, it would be fired brick, fired rocks, those rocks that are, they're discolored. So you dig down, all of a sudden you see a black rock and say, someone was here.
But would it be round or brick or baked in?
Oh, you mean the rocks?
Yeah.
Oh, they would be any kind of rock. It's like you're putting up a fireplace.
And the other question was the water, how's it connected to the reservoir system for the area?
The first reservoir for Northampton was built in about 1870, as I remember. And that is the one at, what's it called? It leads the swimming hole. What's it called?
Yeah, it's Musanti, isn't it? Isn't it?
Musanti
Named after
Beach
Musanti.
was the very first one. And then the larger one was built 20 years later, and that's on the Ashfield Road going up towards Ashfield out of Williamsburg. It's very common for towns to grab land from some other town, fill it with water, and move the water down. New York is very good at that. how did the question was about the diversion, the first diversion, second diversion, whatever it is. The first diversion was actually in 1710. It was after the meadows were doled out to all the proprietors. And since the livestock was on the meadows, and the meadows then became the most important, most valuable land. And what happened is that they were English, and they thought it would be rather moderate, you know, a rather nice, calm time of year when we would have some floods, and then they would disappear. And of course, this is America, and the floods come and go when they feel like it, so they'd flood the fields. The Mill River would flood the fields, and they tried to divert it. They first, and not only tried, but they diverted it directly into the Connecticut River, which is where the water treatment plant is. It used to run up by Fort Hill. The second diversion is to move it out of town after the great floods of 1936, and that is where West Street is. So, and if you go down to, on the bike path, you'll see where that ditch is.
I'll just add, this guy wrote the book. This is the book. And there's incredible old historic maps. The map that Stan zoomed in on at one point was made for this book. If as much detail as you could ever want, I really warmly encourage you. This is a 15,000-year history of the Mill River till today.
It's cheaply available in your local library.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Looking at the river, especially around the Greenway, it's so little water, it's hard to imagine that it actually powered all those mills way back when. What's the story with that? Was it boil water or what?
Well, you dam the river if you don't get enough head. The very first mill was built around 1670, or even earlier, 1650. We don't have to worry about that. The second dam is 1666, and that's Paradise Pond. So that is the industrial heart of Northampton for 200 years until the 1850s. So all you have to do is build something high enough, you can trap enough water over the summer to do a small mill. You know, these are, that good enough. I do want to say, before anything happens, that we want to thank Stan and Marjorie for gorgeous, really a gorgeous piece of work. Marjorie.
I want to just add again on the the volume of water, just real quickly to follow up on that. I don't know, even just recently, in the last month when there's been a couple of big rainstorms, any of you have noticed, the Mill River is considered very flashy because it's a narrow, small river that drains a large watershed. The watershed's 30, 40 square miles. Even in just a few hours, you can see this river go up 5-6 feet. I live in Williamsburg. Anybody sees in Williamsburg, it comes real close to the level of the street very often. And so sort of your lazy day where there hasn't been much rain, it may seem like a piddly little river, but it can get quite aggressive very quickly.
As a 19th century journalist wrote in the Gazette, the Mill River is an early riser.
Stan, I want to thank you for taking my fragmented experience of the Mill River and knitting it together with that imagery. And you two have always told me that there's a coherent story of the river, but I didn't experience it until tonight.
Well, thank you.
Stan,
And
I was really curious that your imagery was always looking upstream. Was that until the very end, and then it looked like you were looking downstream?
Oh, actually, it was back and forth.
Back and forth. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's just my imagination. All right, thank you.
It was an illusion.
on behalf of all the dogs in Northampton, I would like to say,
The dogs played a very important role here in this film. Yes, sir.
I'd love to ask about how the dams have impacted the ecology of the river over time, because I know that it seems like an incredibly dammed river.
Yeah.
I know that that must have had some ecological impact. I don't even know if it's safe to swim in necessarily.
fish. The impact of dams on the river, on the ecology of the river, of course, they chop the river up. The river is supposed to be a whole piece. And it's no different than all the dams on the other rivers, thousands of dams in New England. Most of them are called deadbeat dams. But then the problem is, if you want to take them all down and allow the free flow of the river all the way up, then people find, the historians say, no, you can't do that. So, and the people who, the swimmers say, no, you can't do this, or swimming hole. So you get ecologists and historical people at each other's throats. I mean, literally, they go crazy. What it does is not only, however, stop any possibility of migrating fish. And of course, there used to be migrating fish coming up this river. In fact, the man had a much bigger run for hydrologic reasons. But we don't get fish moving up and down the river, which means we don't get mussels moving up and down the river. And freshwater mussels are very important throughout the whole system in cleaning the water. And mussels multiply by sending out little globs of their free-swimming little tiny things into the gills of fish. And they attach onto the fish gills, and then they drop off at some other point where they feel like it, and then dig into the soil. So the whole system is impacted.
I just want to echo everything that's been said. Thank you so much for all of this.
Just to add a little bit on safe swimming, there's very frequently a significant level of E. coli down here coming into Smith, and that does have a lot to do with how much dog activity. That's real. Connecticut River Conservancy monitors water quality, and they have some websites where you can check those levels based on field data collection. So that's one thing to look at. And then another thing to think about is that this river was an industrial site for several hundred years. It has been about 100 years since it was an industrial site, but it's often considered that the particulate matter might be aggravated after those big flows. So in quieter days, you're going to have less levels of whatever's left from the brass works and the cutlery and all of the manufacturing that happened over this river over hundreds of years. So,
thank you.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Question about the silk industry. How long did it last, and why did it fail? And I think it might be Marjorie who's going to answer us.
Bring this over to you.
Okay, I'll answer that. The reason is that
Bring the mic closer to, bring the mic closer.
Mic closer, is that better? Can you hear me? Doesn't work.
I hear it, it's
You
working.
hear me? Can people hear me? No. I'll talk louder, and I hope that works. Okay. So the silk industry here started back in the early days of the education and industry program. And they at that time had the utopian idea that they could raise silk here, but starting with the silkworms and mulberries. That's why there are mulberry trees around this place. And they tried it, but they didn't understand that it's hard work. They had no idea that all the fussy rules that the Chinese had laid down were necessary. And they thought if they just had the right spirit, everything would work fine, and it didn't. And there was a mulberry crash that was like the Great Tulip Crash in Holland. And then the Association of Education and Industry realized that they couldn't keep that. They thought they could keep that going, but they couldn't. And when they failed, then it was Samuel Hill who decided to start with steam and to continue with silk, but to buy the silk from Japan, the raw silk from Japan, and twist it here and make it into thread here. So they bought that. That's how the industry actually grew. So there was a big trade with Japan. And here they invented a way of triple twisting. The original earlier threads had been 2 threads together twisted, and that was strong, but it wasn't strong enough for the sewing machines that were just invented. And they kept snapping, all the thread kept snapping. Here they've invented a triple twist, and they took it down to Isaac Singer in New York. And he tried it out, and he said, I'll buy all you can sell and all you can make. And so they came back up here with a check for $5,000 from him, and in those days that was a lot of money, more than now. And they renamed the village where they lived Florence. That's how Florence got its name, because it was supposed to be Florence, named for the Florence of Italy. It was going to be just as great as Florence, Italy. And they continued, but it was Corticelli silk and all. They twisted it, they dyed it, they made it for knitting, for crocheting, for all kinds of things. But they didn't raise the silkworms anymore. And that ended mainly with the Great Depression. And then, of course, the Second World War cut off trade with Japan. And so between those two things, it was all over. And that's how it ended.
A quick note on that. The guy who wanted it changed from Broughton's Meadow to Florence, it's a German guy. So, and he thought, yeah, well, we are going to change this, make it very luxurious, yeah? And we changed the name of the Mill River to Arno. That was a bridge too far.
Yeah, go ahead in the back.
A quick comment. Back in the 1980s, mid-80s, I worked at the Brassworks, and I took a number of black and white photographs of the dam. And Stan had some footage in there tonight of that dam, and in 40 years, it has really disintegrated quite a bit. So even though the river's taken back quite quickly.
Interesting.
We studied the Brassworks Dam with some Smith College engineering students a few years ago, and we determined doing hydrological models that the river can no longer see the dam. So it's sort of ecologically not significant anymore. There isn't a mill pond to speak of behind it anymore. And mostly that's Hurricane Irene is what took out most of the bigger chunks that you see scattered down at the foot of the dam now.
Interesting.
Freeman.
So it's so enriching to have these incredible images, you know, that I feel like the last 30 plus years of my life is told by those images, that so much time walking along the river in different spots, and to know the history, you know, it feels, I feel very fortunate to have that. But the other thing that I'm thinking about is the future. And we know that there are all these stories about disappearing rivers, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what we all should be thinking about in terms of preserving this incredible resource that we have.
There are a number of points to make. The first one is...
Repeat the question first.
Oh, the question is, what is the future of the river? Bring people down to the river. There are a number of ways to do that. If you look at Northampton neighbors from time to time, I lead river walks along the whole river, and you sign up for the hiking group. I won't do another one for another couple of weeks, but we do the river. Bring people to the river. Speaking of which, Wendy Stein and
Jan's here. Yeah. Karen's here.
and
Jan's
Karen
here.
here have made up these explorer kits with Forbes Library. and Smith College Museum. And they are available if you have children or grandchildren. Go down to the children's room and say, I'd like to have one of these fabulous backpacks, to borrow one, and bring the kids down to the river.
Does this go till 8? About?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, no later than
Yeah,
that.
go ahead, Nick.
I have a question for Stan. The opening shot was of 3 cats. Were they wild? And if they were wild, how come you didn't scare them away?
Oh, well, that was filmed by Laurie Sanders, and she placed trail cameras at various points along the river. So there's no person there, and the camera is activated by motion. Hmm?
Where did you get the footage?
Oh, from Laurie Sanders. Where did she put them? Well, I know there's one scene near Paradise Pond, but there's another scene near Grow Food, Northampton. And I'm not sure where the bobcats were or the deer.
If you look on the historic Northampton website,
Yes.
and you can see Laurie's fabulous series all up and down the river. It's really cool.
Yeah.
I wonder if before I take another question, I could just shamelessly talk at you briefly. So again, John Sinton, Gabby Immerman, we're kind of the coalescers of community. This is a little bit of a riff on your question, Freeman. Yeah, this is us. Yes, also on our behalf, I want to extend my deep appreciation and gratitude to Stan and Marjorie. I feel like I could see all of you during the film at least at some point you nodded. You saw a place you recognized or an experience you've had. And one of the things I think that's so powerful about this river is that it's our river. And the purpose of the Mill River Greenway Initiative, which John started 13, 14 years ago now, I see it as really giving the river back to the community. Every one of us, if you live in Northampton or Leeds or Haydenville or Skinnerville or Bay State or Florence, every one of these, Williamsburg, every one of these villages exists because they grew up around mills on this river. Even Northampton, that's true. Northampton is located here because of the meadows and the power at the mill. That's why civilization gathered, colonial civilization gathered in these places. So I suspect most of you live in a river town, but you may not think of yourselves as living in a river town. And so the Greenway Initiative is we're just here to do anything that gives you the river back. And so, Stan, your project, I think, is so meaningful. John's book does this through words and images. Stan and Marjorie have done it through music and these beautiful moving pictures. But I think in some ways this river tonight has kind of given you, Julia, to your point, the river back. So I just wanted to share, since you guys are like our constituents, just a little snapshot of what's going on in terms of organizing and community building around the river. So John started the Mill River Greenway Initiative roughly 2009, 2010. It has been fiscally sponsored by the Connecticut River Conservancy for the last 10 years, and we're just in the middle right now of a transition. We're sort of resizing, and pleased to say that what will now be called the Friends of the Mill River Greenway is going to nest ourselves in with the Friends of Northampton Trails. And Freeman's here, and George Cahout, and so our wonderful partners at FNT are gonna hold us now, which seems a little bit more commensurate in terms of really being locally housed. So stay tuned for formerly known as MRGI is now gonna be FMRG, same thing, same people. So I wanted to share that with you. So that's one fiscally sponsored entity that exists and coalesces energy and helps to create events and does things like partnering with Smith College. These are our beautiful historic walking brochures. There's 4 of them. I just brought samples, but if anybody's interested in them, they're at this library, they're at Historic Northampton, and you also could just email info@millrivergreenway.org. There are also PDFs online, right? So these are available. You can just come and browse them if you want to see them on your way out. These are historic images, some of which you saw in the film, and then sort of telling you where to stand today and to get the same view. So that's a self-guided walking experience. The other entity that exists, in addition to the sort of regional, is the Williamsburg Mill River Greenway Committee, which is an entity of the government, the town government of Williamsburg. And our committee in Bergie has significantly advanced on the planning and soon execution of an actual thing called the Mill River Greenway, which is a shared use path that will connect Northampton to Williamsburg following the course of the Mill River. So this greenway already exists in certain places. For example, I'm sure almost all of you have walked along the Mill River between Smith College and Federal Street. So all I would have to do is, put up a medallion, ta-da, right? And that could be Mill River Greenway. Another place you might be familiar would be the Northampton bike system between Leeds and Haydenville, where what you think of as the Mass Central bike trails actually runs along one of the most beautiful, rustic, bothered by development stretches of the river. And so that would be another place where I'm a medallion away from it existing. But all the rest of it is designed and planned, and you're gonna see it start to exist in Williamsburg as soon as next year. We have some of the funding on South Main Street in Haydenville, but ultimately a Mill River Greenway will come from where the bike trail currently ends at the foot of South Main in Haydenville, go up South Main Street to the Brassworks, and then run for 2 miles from the Brassworks to Williamsburg Town Center on Route 9 as a dedicated 10-foot shared use path with a guardrail separating walkers and bikers from Route 9. So, yeah, this is exciting. Okay. And then if you'll indulge me, there's one more piece of data that I want to share, which is those of you that are good at math may have done the math from the Mill River flood, and you will have calculated that next year is the 150th anniversary of the Mill River flood. So May 16th, 2024 will be the 150th anniversary of the Mill River disaster of 1874. And there is a group of us that is coalescing around commemorating that with a series of events next May. Historic Northampton is holding that. But the Atchisons are here somewhere, and Friends of Mill River Greenway is involved with this. And there are many ideas for what this might look like, and I encourage you to stay tuned. But one of our intentions is that we're going to raise funds through grants and private donations to plant 139 trees along the course of the Mill River flood, each of which would be in commemoration of someone who lost their life. And you might be interested to know that almost half of the 139 people who died were children because they were home, whereas many of the adults were out and working in the mills. And so, our local historians know who these people are and where they were from, and each of these trees will be in a memory. We have some ideas about clusters of trees to commemorate families. We'll try to put folks from Leeds and Leeds trees and Skinnerville and Skinnerville. So I think that's going to be a really meaningful way to create a living memorial. And I also think, Freeman, I appreciated your softball question. This is really a way to both look backwards at the history and then also be looking forwards by adding carbon sequestration and shade and beautiful cultural history to the Mill River Greenway. So these are the kinds of organizing activities that are happening. If these things sound interesting to you, easy to find us at millrivergreenway.org. There's a mailing list. We're not spammy. But that would be how you would know. You could hear about a walk that John's leading, get our PDFs, anything like that. So,
thank you. We have to end